Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are, whichever part of the world you are joining in today. So welcome to the Independent Talk. I'm your host, Anjan Chakraborty, and I bring you this series, the Independent Talk, which primarily seeks to chronicle the lives of independent journalists around the world. We would talk to them and learn from their experience, their journey, their success, their challenges, and the wonderful stories that they are doing on a day-to-day basis in the world of independent journalism. Once we get to know their stories, I believe we learn a lot about independent journalism as a career path and how one should go about it. So without any more delay, let me introduce our guest for the Independent Talk today, Alexandra Carlton. We're all going to call her Alex because that's how she goes by the name Alex. So Alexandra Carlton is a journalist, a copywriter, and an editor based in Sydney, Australia. And she is in the world of journalism for almost 2 decades, 20 years. She has been, her career began in women's lifestyle magazines, where she worked as a features editor for titles like Mary Claire, Madison, and Who Weekly. But she has always preferred the freedom of freelancing. So today she specializes in not specializing, and she writes on travel, food, current affairs, lifestyle, parenting, women's interest for some of Australia's most well-known mastheads like Marie Claire, Qantas, the Australian Gourmet Traveller, Escape, news.com.au, and more. Welcome, Alex, to the Independent Talk, and thank you for making time to share your story as an independent journalist. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, now before we begin, let me set the ground rules for this talk show. So initially, I get to ask Alice a few questions. Yes, I'm the host, so I have that privilege to ask the first questions to Alex. Once she is sharing her journey as an independent journalist, whatever questions that you have, please note them down in the chat room. And once Alex finishes her talk, I'll take those questions and I'll ask Alex those questions on your behalf. So that's how it's going to be. So Alex, thank you again for agreeing to be a part of this show. Thank you. And I want to start off by saying the simple reason that you became an independent journalist. How did it all begin? You were a working journalist and you transitioned to an independent journalist. So tell us about that journey.
I guess I've always found it exciting to jump around a little bit in my job. I was never one of those people who stayed at one publication for 5-10 years. I think the longest I ever stayed at one was probably just 5 years, maybe. So I found that I really enjoyed variety. I really enjoyed learning different things, writing about different things, having different colleagues. And that, I think, really set me up for, without me even knowing I was doing it, I think it set me up for a career in working on my own and leaping around and working for all different mastheads. It came about, I think it would have been maybe 2013, something like that, I think. I had been working as an editor of a fashion magazine, and new owners came in and took over the magazine. They made some changes, and after a time, they ended up offering a redundancy. They basically shut the magazine and they offered me a redundancy. And I'm not sure how it happens in India, but in Australia, if you get made redundant from a job, you're given a sort of severance package, you're given some money. And so that little buffer of money was enough to make me think, all right, I've got a bit of cash to sort of survive on. So why don't I go out on my own and see if I can make it on my own without actually leaping into another full-time job. And I'm not sure if I would have had the courage to do it if I didn't have that little safety net of money. That was really helpful. Although in the end, I probably didn't really need it. It did actually work out, but it was more of a psychological buffer to know that I had that there if I needed it. And so because I jumped around so much and I'd been to all these different mastheads, I knew a lot of people. And Australia, Sydney, it's a very, very small market, certainly compared to anything that you would have in India. So we do tend to know each other a little bit. And once you've worked at a lot of different publications, then you have those contacts, and it makes it a little bit easier to sort of put your hand up and go, hi, I'm freelancing now. Are you interested in having me work for you? Is there any writing I can do for you? So I guess that's pretty much how it began. Yeah.
Okay. So can you tell us in your journey as an independent journalist, I mean, since you write on a very wide range of topics, so which are the ones that you enjoy the most? And I mean, any specific story that you remember was, I mean, loved working on?
Well, I think in the last maybe 5 years, I've transitioned into doing a lot of travel journalism, except obviously when the pandemic hit and now none of us can travel. But certainly before that happened, I was doing a lot, and I've done some incredible journeys. My most recent one, or one of the most recent ones, just before the shutdowns happened, I went to the Arctic and did a cruise around the Arctic Circle with polar bears and got to write that for Qantas magazine. I also went to Canada, to the beautiful town of Jasper for the Australian. Travel's the dream. Travel writing is fantastic. The only thing I would say about travel writing, it can be a little tough on the bank balance, because as an independent journalist, time is money. So you need to be in front of your computer writing and clocking up those words every single day. So if you're out on a trip, especially if you're in the Arctic Circle with no internet connection, that can be sort of 6 days of writing that you sort of lose out of your work days. But yes, it was amazing.
So travel is one thing that has really, I mean, you love that part of your job the most, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, that's great. So the next question that I have for you, Alex, is something that I ask everybody on the show, is that, and this is a question we get a lot from all the participants or all the budding journalists as well, is how do you pitch a story to a media organization that, hey, I've got this idea, do you want me to write on it? I mean, sure. How does that begin, that pitching part?
Yeah. Again, it helps if you know someone. It's nice to be able to pitch to someone you know, but I don't think that's 100% necessary, because I've worked as an editor and I've had people pitch me. And I think the trick is, there's two things. I think be as simple and clear as you can. I don't think you need to write a pitch that's 800 words long. I think it should be just give the hook, write the headline first. That is a thing that will get an editor more than anything. Think of what the headline could be: the surprising new way that we are, or the inside the world of. Those are my two favorite headlines. If someone gives me the surprising new or inside the world of, I'm always in. If it's introducing me to something that I haven't heard before, I use those all the time. So keep it very, very simple, but also do your research about their publication. I personally, a lot of editors don't like if you haven't, if you pitch a story that they've already run. I don't mind that. I feel like I can't expect journalists to have known every single thing that the publication's ever run, but research their sections. So there might be a newspaper that has a finance section. Look at what's in that finance section. Do they have a big 1,000-word story at the front, and then they do Q&As, and then they do a first person? Decide very specifically where your pitch would fit. Let them know that you understand their publication.
Okay, I mean, so I mean, the learning from here is, I mean, you need to know the organization pretty well for pitching a story. I mean, because every news organization has a different character of its own when it comes to the stories that they want to cover. So it's important to do a research done. That's one that's very essential. And if I don't know anybody, I mean, since you, as you said, Sydney is a small it's a small area to network with people. So it's easier to, you primarily would be knowing everybody in every organization,
Quite
right?
a few people, yeah.
So, but if somebody wants to start out, it's somebody doesn't know anybody, and
Yeah,
they
that's hard.
that's hard. May have to research online and find out who the editor is or who the features editor is, and then start pitching. But even still, it's essential to know the character of that news organization. So that's a very important starting point. Okay, thank you for that insight. Second question that I have for you is that, so pitching is one part. The second part is not all stories, ideas, and pitches are accepted.
No, not at all.
So there is also a lot of rejection that happens. People might not even respond to you, or they might respond and say, nah, I don't need this, not wanted, not needed.
Yeah.
Or they might say, go and pitch, you can pitch somebody else. They might give a reference to somebody else. So there's a lot of rejection that comes along this job, right, as an independent journalist. So how do you tackle that? Or how do you think young people who want to get into independent journalism should tackle that?
I remember when I was young and starting out, I said that I would one day be able to make an art installation where I could paper my entire office with every rejection I ever got when I was first trying to get into magazines. I could have wallpapered a house with them. And it was hard and it was heartbreaking, and I never thought I would get in. It's really tough. I think the thing to remember is it's not personal. If someone rejects your pitch, it just may not be quite what they're looking for quite this second. And it doesn't mean that you aren't any good or that another pitch mightn't work for them at another time. I would always say, don't push back. Don't come back and go, oh, hang on, but maybe if I did it this way, or what about if I just change this part of it? If they've said no, they mean no. I wouldn't go back again. You may be able to try it, at another publication, but I wouldn't try and push back on the same pitch. Just keep trying. There's no harm in asking for feedback too, to ask, look, what was wrong about this pitch? What would be, is there anything you could tell me that I could do differently? But again, editors are very busy. Don't be too offended if they don't have the time to respond to that either. Again, I would just look at refining your pitches so that they work very deliberately with that editor and with that publication, and also try and make things timely and newsworthy. Peg your pitches to something that's going on in the world. If a new survey came out and said, more journalists are quitting their job to become independent journalists, which is true. That is actually, there's a lot of data out at the moment saying that. Is there a story around that? It's a timely, newsworthy thing. Peg it to something that's happening in the world. That's often a good way to get your pitches across.
Okay, so that's a very interesting insight from Alex. I have, while during the course of my talk with other independent journalists, they have given the same kind of thought when it comes to rejection, that, don't push the editor, don't keep emailing them, and, some people have even said, there is also a tendency that you go into the social media platform and abuse the editor.
Oh, never do that. No.
Haven't you answered to my pitch? You should never do that. So anyway, thanks for that. My next question to you is, what are the other challenges? One challenge is on the part of, how do you pitch a story? How do you tackle rejection? That's one part. The other part is being an independent journalist. You, while you're a working journalist for any news organization, you kind of have an identity card, the badge to carry wherever you go. As an independent journalist, you have none. And sometimes, you could be doing field reporting, going on the ground, going to places. So there can be challenges on the ground as well. And there could be other challenges. One of them could be the financial challenge, which you were talking about that. So what are the other challenges that, if I want to go into independent journalism, I should be aware, okay, apart from my pitches not working, the rejections happening, I'll also have to face these challenges. What are those?
I think that point you brought up before about not bringing things up on social media that you shouldn't, I would be very careful about keeping your social media very, very clean. I'm not on social media much. I do a little bit of Instagram. I stay away from Twitter because I think you don't want to become a thing. A journalist should always be a bit in the background. A journalist is just there to record other people's stories or to write pieces for an editor as a byline, but usually as an anonymous head. Really, it's a little bit different. You can put yourself in sometimes, but I try very hard to keep myself quite out of things, because I don't want to ever be that person who writes the stupid thing on Twitter and everybody then knows about it and all my editors think, oh, she's a bit of a problem. We don't want to work with her. So be really careful about, you can be on social media, but keep it very bland. Don't wade into big controversial topics and put your point across, I would say. The other thing I think is, you never lose that feeling of, will I get another story? Will I get another commission? There's always, even now I've been doing it, I don't know how long. I've been pretty much freelance for at least 5 or 6 years, something like that. And I still today, I handed a piece in today, actually this morning, and I haven't heard back. And I'm still thinking, did they hate it? Did they hate it? Did they hate it? It's also a Saturday, so she probably hasn't checked her emails. So it's probably fine, but you will always have that fear of, will the next commission come? Will my story be okay? And you've got to learn to ride with that. You've got to learn not to panic. You've got to learn to just sit with that and work through it and not frantically email your editors and go, did you like it? Did you like it? And then the financial side of things, look, I guess, I supplement mine with a lot of copywriting, which is fantastic because that pays a lot more than journalism. I set myself monthly targets of how much I want to earn every month, and I pretty much always hit them, which is just a nice thing to keep in your head so that you know how much you're earning and it gives you something to work towards. But other than that, it's a pretty good life. You get to make your own hours. You get to take on the work that you want. It's pretty fantastic. And I think I'm pretty lucky.
Like you had already mentioned that in your bio, the freedom of freelancing.
Yes, it is. It means, if it's my son's birthday on Monday and I can take the whole day off to spend with him, I've got all my work done on the weekend, I can just make it into my own hours, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, great. Thanks for that. Now, my next question, which is the most obvious one, and is the financial part. How easy or difficult? Like you said, you set yourself targets.
Yes.
When it comes to, monthly targets of how much you want to earn. Do you think, now I have been told that we don't really know how much is enough to earn, because we really don't know how much is enough. For some people, this much is enough. For some people, this much is enough. So we don't know how much is enough. But even then, from the security of a full-time job to freelancing, to the world of freelancing, where that work will be scattered all around and you may not have enough work every month. So how do you balance and support your financial earnings per month? How do you do that? Is there any, I don't know if there is any recipe that you can share with us? This is how you manage your finances.
Well, for one thing, when you get a big commission and a big fat paycheck, do not spend it all at once. I'm pretty good with my money. I'm always thinking the next one might be a little bit far coming. You've got to know exactly when all your bills are due. You've got to be very aware that you've got enough for every month. It's nice to have a little emergency stack of money too, just in case, sometimes one publication, their finance department will have some problem with their computers and they won't pay you for a month. It does happen. So, look, I think in my case, I don't really negotiate rates either. I will take whatever is being paid, more or less. And because of that, I work very, very long hours. I will take every single story that comes to me. I hate saying no. I hate turning anyone down. And I don't like to negotiate on money because I figure the publication is offering me what they can offer me. I don't think I'm being, I don't want to be that person who's haggling over money. And when you start out, you should definitely take whatever's given to you and just work hard and get those runs on the board. And then you can maybe negotiate for rates down the track. I guess, like you say, different people need different amounts of money to live on. You decide what that is for you and you work to that level. And you just copywriting, get into a little bit of copywriting on the side too, pays better. If you've got the brain for it, it's quite easy to do. And it's a nice way to sort of supplement things. Yeah.
Just a supplementary question on the copywriting, because you mentioned that it usually pays better than journalism. So copywriting for whom? Who are usually the clients that seek copywriting services? I mean, how do you get those clients?
Yeah, I'm very lucky. The way it began for me, magazines often have advertorial content in them, certainly in Australia. So they might have an advertiser who wants a journalist to write some ad copy for them. So it sounds more journalistic, and it's usually marked as advertorial. If you can get into doing a little bit of that, once you've established good relationships with your editors, and you can get into doing some copywriting for that within the magazine, that is a great way to start. That doesn't often pay too much, but it's a great thing to have in your portfolio. Get your portfolio up there. Every bit of copywriting that you do, have an online portfolio and put it up there. And if you do that and you're active on LinkedIn, that's how you found me, and you let people know that you do copywriting, it starts to come to you, which is what's happened to me. It's kind of come out of the blue. I don't know, again, what the situation is in India, but in Australia, copywriting is going through the roof. We're all more online now. Everyone's starting their own businesses. Everyone's doing startups, and people just need copy, tons and tons and tons of it. So if you can grab any little bit of it and start putting a portfolio together online, it'll start coming to you. Hopefully.
Oh, great. So that's great to know, because I think, copywriting, as far as India is concerned, it is still in a very nascent stage, and it is also not a very rewarding, as far as financial is concerned. It's not a very rewarding financial aspect. Journalism pays you probably better, because I think in copywriting in India, people are paid per word. So you're basically paid per word, and that the amount of money that they are being paid per word is abysmally low.
In Australia, it's the opposite. In journalism, you get paid per word. Copywriting, you get paid hourly or day rates. So that's very interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's about India. Okay. So thank you for those insights into your journey as an independent journalist. I'll now start taking the questions that I have got from the participants. Okay, the first question comes from Padmaja Jayaraman. Her question is, usually journalists are advised to choose a particular niche or beat, but you specialize on not specializing. So how does that work?
Do you know what? I don't know anyone else who does this. I think I'm one of the few journalists I know who has not specialized. It is very unusual, Padmaja. You're absolutely right. And it just came from making those connections that I made. And I guess a journalist should be able to write about anything, really, because as I said earlier, you're there to just record the stories. You're there to translate somebody else's story into words that people want to read. And in theory, you should be able to do that across anything. But you're absolutely right. It is weird that one day I will be writing some hard news story for Marie Claire, where I'm writing about, women's employment or women's shelters or something quite hard news. And then the next day I'll be doing a restaurant review. And it's just a matter of being able to switch quickly, learn things fast, research fast. And you've got to read and read and read and read, because you're right. If you knowing one single beat, you can know absolutely everything about it. You can become the absolute expert. Having a few beats, you have to be expert at everything. So read and 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 read every spare second. Yeah.
I think actually Alex is right when it comes to writing about anything under the sun is what a journalist ought to do. But very few journalists do that. I mean, they kind of specialize in a certain kind of reporting. Somebody does politics and stuff. Somebody would be doing, the travel and the food stuff. Somebody would be doing all the investigative, the crime and all that stuff. So it's actually rare what Alex is doing. I mean, she writes on travel, food, and current affairs, and women's issues. She's doing everything under the sun.
Yeah.
There's a supplementary question to that is, usually when we grow up and we get into the profession of journalism, what we usually find is that, the writing style, the narration is very different from a hard news, a current affairs story, to a travel piece or a food piece. It's very different, the narrative and the writing style. And in fact, it's, I don't know, but I find it difficult to kind of, be able to master both when you're looking at hard news, like you said, the Australian woman employment kind of stories, and you're writing on travel, going around Arctic. So that's a very, very different way to present your story. So how do you do that? I mean, completely different styles of writing.
Yeah. Again, I guess I just know how to do that switch. I know very well what my editors want from me, and I know how to adjust it. But you're right. And I'm probably more comfortable in the current affairs world. That's where I began writing hard news stories. So that comes a lot easier to me than, say, travel, where you often have to put yourself in it a bit. And it's quite emotive, and you're painting word pictures, and there's some real sort of artistry to that sort of writing. I'm less comfortable in that space, even though that's probably what I do more of these days. And I guess it's a matter of, the way I write fast. I get everything out there, bang it out, and then I go back and I polish. And I really do have to remind myself with travel, exactly what you said, that it has to be more not flowery, but more rich and more evocative. And I do find myself trying to I have to force myself into the story a little bit more. It's just a matter of being aware of what those different styles are, being hyper aware of it, and tailoring your work to it. It comes with practice. Writing's all about practice.
Yeah, I think that's the most important thing. It comes with practice. And as Alex said, read, and read. I think the next thing after that is practice.
It's funny, whenever I have a mental block, I just go, the writing's just not sounding right. I just don't like the way it's feeling. I go and I just read my favorite writers. I'll just read a page of some old thing that they've written, and I go, oh, okay. And it's not that I'm then taking their style or ripping them off or anything, but it just clicks my brain back into that sort of more imaginative world, I think, when I read people I like. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. The next question comes from Satyaki. His question is, so you have been practicing journalism in Australia. So he says, I don't know if you have any idea about how journalism or journalists work in India. But he's saying that the challenges that journalists face in India has got a lot to do with harassment. So, and harassment, not just on the ground, but even harassment on social media. Right. So because of a story that you have done, which may not be, which may not have gone down too well with a certain group of people. So there is a lot of abuse and harassment that a journalist in India faces, both on the ground as well as on social media. Do you face similar kind of instances in Australia?
I don't personally, because I don't think that I work for any, if I was working for News Corp or something, which I do write for a bit, but I don't write their really hard news stuff. I'm not totally sure what the reasons for it are in India, but certainly in Australia, we have very left-wing people and very right-wing people. And if you publish something on either side, yes, you will go head to head with the other side for sure. Again, I know that this shouldn't be the solution, because it shouldn't be the someone who's being victimized should not have to remove themselves from the situation. I really understand that, but it's another reason that I tend not to go on social media too much. I don't want to get into those fights. I want to publish my thing and let it sit there and speak for itself. And if people want to fight over it between themselves and throw abuse about me online and I don't know about it, go for it. I don't need to know. I don't care. That's something that I try to do. I just try to stay off social media. On the ground, I mean, I have to say that's not something that I'm aware of happening in Australia. And I think that's terrible that it happens to you guys over there. And I'm sorry, I can't give you any advice in that area, but I hope you all stay very safe. Yeah.
Yeah. Different parts of the world, there are different challenges for journalists.
Yeah.
Every country will have a different challenge. The next question comes from Joydeep. His question is, in India, when it comes to journalism studies, where people get into, college and university to learn, to get a degree in journalism and mass communication, people are usually, trained and taught in a way that they get into a full-time job in a media company. The usual training and the teaching does not align to an independent career path. So he wants to know, how does it work? How does journalism education in Australia, what is that scene, and does that kind of give you the scope to even become an independent journalist right out of college, or is there a different scenario?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think it's very similar in Australia. I don't know if this is what people want to hear, but I am not aware of anyone. I'm sure they are out there, but I would always advise that you get in-house somewhere first. I think before you try and go out on your own, you have to have worked in some organization, some media organization, to learn the basics not just of writing, but also of how the whole story production process goes, how it goes from idea to pitch to commissioning to editing to getting into the publication. That chain, to understand that chain, helps you learn how to craft stories and how to craft ideas. And again, it's also really great for starting to make those connections. If you work at a newspaper or a magazine, you're going to meet your colleagues at the very least, and then they may leave and go off to other publications, but they'll remember you. And I don't know of any journalists in Australia who have written for me when I was an editor who didn't have that base groundwork before they went independent. I'd recommend it, even if it's only year 2, 3 years, and then you feel you've got enough confidence to go out on your own. I just think you need that sort of groundwork. I guess it's like, I don't know, I guess it's like being a chef, like you probably can't go out and be a independent chef that goes on TV shows and has their own line of cookware and has their own sponsorship with a big brand until you've done the hard yards in a kitchen and learned how to actually operate a restaurant, I imagine, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Alex. The next question comes again from Padmaja. Her question is, I have been working on environmental stories, but I also want to start lifestyle and culture. When I pitch to a media house, what are the odds that they would commission me for lifestyle stories even after going through my portfolio, which is primarily environmental stories? What should I do to convince them that I can do lifestyle stories too?
That's a great question. I really like that question. Is there anything in your portfolio that leans in that direction? Is there anything you can sort of bump up to the top to make it look like, when they go straight onto your page, that's not 100% environment? Have you got some other ones you can sort of place near the top that gives them a bit of an idea that you've done other things? And then I guess it's the strength of your pitches, really. You don't necessarily have to tell them your background when you go in for a pitch. You don't need to say, I am an environmental journalist, but I've got this great idea about food. Just leave the environmental side of things out. Just mention, hi, I'm a journalist, my name is this, and this is my one pitch idea. One idea is also always better than 7, by the way. When I used to get pitches as an editor of 7 different ideas, I'd be, well, why have you given me 7? Give me the one best one that you've got. So it's tough. I really understand that's a hard one. That's hard. But I think if your idea is good enough and you hit that right story at the right time for the right editor, because so much of pitching is about just the right moment, it's just that editor needs that story right at that time. If you'd pitched a week ago, they wouldn't have needed it. If you pitched in a week's time, it wouldn't have been right. You just hit them right at that moment. So I think just keep trying, and good luck. I think you'll get there.
Okay. I hope that answers your question, Padmaja, or if you want a supplementary question to that, you can ask it also. She says, thank you. Okay. The next question comes from Ashish. His question is that, in the last 1.5 years, especially when the pandemic hit, we have been bombarded with a lot of misinformation, disinformation surrounding the pandemic. And in India, it was a very bad situation as far as false information and stories are concerned. How was the situation in Australia? Did you face same kind of misinformation and disinformation in the course of the pandemic?
It's interesting because I was saying to Anjan before, we're actually only beginning our pandemic now. We've actually held it off almost the whole way, and we're just coming into it now. So we are just starting to see exactly this sort of misinformation that you guys went through. Because we're such a small media market, it is less easy, I think, for that to become widespread in the mainstream. Obviously, social media full of misinformation. I don't think there's any real solution to that. But actually, there's not a lot of media. There's not a lot of mainstream media in Australia. We really have News Corp, we have The Guardian, and we have Fairfax, which is sort of another Australian publication. And News Corp in particular, they get a lot of slack around the world for lots of things, not least, Fox News, that sort of thing. But in Australia, they're pretty good, and they're actually leading the charge about why to get vaccinated and why vaccinations are good and why don't believe all the, the misinformation around it. So Australian media is pretty responsible on that front. They recently had a columnist who was spouting stuff about, conspiracy theories, and they fired them. They were like, we've listened to this long enough, done. This is too important to have misinformation and wrong voices out there. It's life or death. So we're very fortunate. We're pretty much getting on top of that side of things. Social media, you can't do anything about though.
You people are really lucky. I have to say this. I mean, because in India, there has been, in the last 1.5 years, there has been like the pandemic and the infodemic. I mean, we have faced a lot of misinformation and disinformation, especially
in your mainstream media, you mean?
Even in mainstream media, we have seen that. Anyway, the next question comes from Shatuki again. His question is, so, I mean, currently, digital is the space where journalism is moving. Now, do you think if being an independent journalist in India, they can even contribute to a publication outside India, say in Australia or even Malaysia, or vice versa? Do you think the scope is there in the market that an Australian journalist can contribute to an Indian publication, or an Indian journalist can contribute to an Australian publication in the independent journalism sphere? Do you think there's a possibility of that happening?
I don't think there's any barriers to it in theory. I think it's just more, what could I, as an Australian journalist, contribute to India? Do you know what I mean? Like, what would I be writing about that Indian people would be interested in? I don't know anything, unless it was something about Australia. For example, I write for some US publications, travel publications about Australia. So, travel writing that's about the country that I live in, that I know about. We certainly have a food reviewer from the New York Times in Australia who writes Australian food reviews for the New York Times. But I'm just not sure what I could contribute to an Indian publication, because unless it's about Australia. Yeah, I guess if it's opinion writing, maybe it's global opinion writing. Certainly, when back to the pandemic, when you guys were sort of going through the really worst time of it, we all had our eyes on you. We all wanted to know what life was like in India because you were experiencing such devastation. And I think Australian publications would have welcomed first person accounts of what you guys were seeing and experiencing during that time. So I think if it's got that global reach, if it's got that, universal appeal, then yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that you would. I would suggest if you have a story that you think could suit an Australian audience, I would try The Guardian over here. And if you go onto the Australian Guardian website, they list all the email addresses for all their editors. They're very good at that. Not everyone does that. If you think you have an Indian story that would appeal to an Australian audience, I would suggest you try there. They could be very open to it.
Okay, I think that would be of interest to everybody who is here, because everybody who is here are primarily Indians. So I'm guessing that would be of really interest. So you can go to the Guardian Australia, find out the email addresses of the editors. And if you think, what's the most important thing that Alex is saying is that if you think you have an Indian story that can be of interest to an Australian audience, you should go out and pitch. Who knows, you might get published.
I'd love to see that. That would be fantastic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Alex. The next question comes from Kusumika Das. Her question is, does government control the Australian media? I mean, how does Australia regulate its media?
We have one state-based media organization called the ABC. But unlike other state-based media organizations around the world, it's almost rabidly independent. It's almost anti-government. Like, it makes such a point of being independent that it often gives the government more grief than I think the government would actually prefer. Other than that, no, all our other media is independent. The challenge that Australia faces is that we have very little media, as I mentioned before. We don't have huge diversity of media. We don't have, like the US has, dozens and dozens and dozens of different TV stations, newspapers, radio, and they tend to be owned by a lot of different people. We don't have our media ownership is quite concentrated amongst a few companies. And I guess it's like anywhere else, that what then comes to the fore is blogs and social media, and that can lead to misinformation, but it can also keep those bigger organizations in check and can evaluate what they're doing and pull them up when they get it wrong. Yeah.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Kusumika. Padmaja is back with another question. Is it possible to pursue more than one story for different beats at the same time?
I will show you my usual story list. These are all the stories that I'm working on at the moment.
That's a very long list that Alex.
Yeah. You see some are crossed out, some I've finished. I'm usually working on 10 at a time. That's my average.
My God.
Yeah.
That's a world record, I think. If there is a Guinness World Record for how many the journalists work simultaneously on, that's
10. And the secret is to learn to get very familiar with how long things are going to take you. And that's trial and error. And the secret is also to start early. I think the hardest part, in my view, of any sort of journalism is just getting the people you need, pinning down those interviews, lining them up, making sure they're there on the day that you need them, finding, that's the stuff that is, I find, the most time consuming. So start that stuff all very early. Don't leave that to the last second, whatever you do. And then once you've lined your interviews up, maybe you can go and work on something else because you've got those interviews done and you can do the writing later. But yeah, I have a good brain now for knowing almost to the minute how long a story is going to take me. And so I know how to just plot out my days because of that.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers your question, Padmaja. Okay, the next question comes from Joydeep. His question is, so you work on, primarily you said you don't work on weekends, so you work Monday to Friday. You're working Monday to Friday. And as an independent journalist, I think he's saying that there are multiple occasions when a commissioning editor might come to you on a Saturday or a Sunday and say, hey, can you do a quick piece on this for me today? I mean, do you think work-life balance, you said you have free, choose your work time, but there can also be a time when you are under the time pressure and deadlines, somebody asking you for a story quickly. So how do you tackle that?
I think the early bit of the question where it said I only work 9 to 5 on weekdays, definitely not. I work weekends as well. Certainly now that we're all in lockdown, my work sort of calmed down a little bit and I'm working a bit less, which is quite nice. But when I'm really, really busy, at my absolute busiest peak, I will be working sometimes 7 days because you just have to. You got to hustle. You got to earn that amount of money that I have set, the amount that I've set myself. It can be long, take every piece that comes to you. And so the work-life balance can get a little thrown off, but then again, I'm good at planning ahead. So like I mentioned, I've got my son's birthday on Monday. I work today. I'm going to be working tomorrow, Sunday, so that I know I can take that Monday off. It's about just sort of, Tetrising your life around so that you have those breaks when you know you need those breaks and you work when you have to. And look, if someone comes to me and needs something fast turnaround, like you say, so an editor comes to me on a Sunday and says, I need this by the end of the day. If I can do it, I do it. And if I can't, I can't. Those really short turnarounds. I had one I turned down just last week from The Guardian, actually. They wanted something the next day, and I had a really big piece for Marie Claire due the next day, and I knew I was going to be writing that all night, so I just had to say, apologies, can't turn it around that fast.
Okay, he has a supplementary question to that, is that, so there could be instances where you have to actually turn down a request for a story because you don't have the time for it. Yeah. So does that kind of, lead to a relationship with that media organization being soured and you not getting stories from them in the future?
Do you know what? That's always my fear. I do always worry about that. And so I do try to say yes to as much as I can. I hate saying no, but this is interesting. An editor of mine recently, actually he's Indian. He's just moved here and he is one of my regular editors. And he said to me, Alex, sometimes turning me down makes me want to use you even more. It makes you look busy. It makes you look like you're just, very in demand. And I thought, okay, all right. And so I've started turning him down a little bit now to do other things. So I think I would never, ever turn down a new approach. If someone had just come to me for the first time and I hadn't worked with them before, I will move heaven and earth to do that piece for them because I never want to do that on the first time. But once you've worked with someone for a while and they know you well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, I'm really sorry, I won't do this piece justice if I squeeze it in. I'm sorry, but definitely remember me for the next one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I hope that answers the question. The next question comes from Joydeep again. His question is, how do you go about negotiating with media houses when it comes to deciding on the payment of your story? How do you negotiate? What's the art of negotiation?
Ugh, I hate it. I hate it more than anything. And I tend, as I said earlier, I tend not to do it. I tend to just, certainly in Australia, they will tend to come to you and say, I need 800 words and it's $1 a word, or they will say, I need 1,200 words and I'm just going to pay you a flat fee of $900, or whatever it is. They tend to tell you upfront what the payment is. And they're telling you that because that's what the payment is. And there is no room for negotiation. And generally you will be viewed, it's unfortunate, but you will be viewed as being a bit difficult if you push back. So I just tend not to. If it's a ridiculously low rate, sometimes I might just do one story for them almost to be nice. And then I'll just sort of step back and not do any more if it's just not worth my time. Yeah, the negotiation, again, I'm not sure how it works in India, but certainly in Australia, the publications, they have their budgets and this is what they're going to pay. And if they don't pay you that, they're going to go and pay someone else that. So you sort of have to take what you're given. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I don't know if there's really a better answer.
I think it's important to know, Alex, just to add to that, is to know that how much is, as you said, something that could be ridiculously low. So you must know that, if there is a story of these many words, this should be the average payout. If somebody is giving you a very low thing, then you would, as Alex said, probably do it once and then probably take a
bye-bye. Yeah. And I think it's important to remember as well that word rates, I can't remember if you said that you guys get paid in word rates. We generally do as well. To me, a 500-word story doesn't necessarily take any less time than a 1,000-word story. The writing is not the part that takes time. And when you're a freelance journalist or independent journalist, it's all about time. Your time is your money. So a 500-word piece that requires 3 interviews is going to take me a lot longer than a 1,000-word piece that is just sort of an opinion piece that I'm writing from my head. So when you accept those jobs, don't just think about the word rate. Think about how many interviews there are in it, how much research is required, and factor that into what they're paying you. And look, if it's really low, if they're saying, we're paying you 70 cents a word and it's a 500-word piece, and so that's nothing, and you know that it's going to take you a long time, maybe you could come back and say, could we make it a project rate instead? Can we make it a flat fee of this? Because there's going to be so much research behind it. I've certainly done that on occasions, and that can sometimes work. Yeah.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Joydeep. I think that was a pretty good question, actually. Negotiations can be hard. Okay, the next question comes from Padmaja again. Her question is, you have worked in newsrooms before you began your independent journalism journey. What do you miss the most about working in newsrooms?
I guess the buzz and the energy and the rush of big stories coming in and being that first one to get it up. And, there's something about a newsroom, you just live and breathe the news. You roll with the day's news, and it's exhilarating and it's fun, and finding that new angle that someone else hasn't found and banging that out fast. I loved that. I used to work in radio a bit too, and radio is very like that too, even more so than print newsrooms. So I do miss that, but it takes it out of you too. Like, you do that for too long and you just like, it's very exhausting to live that way. But
I can put my hand up and say I'm one of them.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you burn out after a while. You got to make sure you take your holidays and take your weekends and step away from it. But it is fun. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I hope, Padmaja, you got your answer. I think this is my last question because we are already up on time. So the last question comes from Ashish. His question is, have you ever got this feeling after you switched from full-time journalist to an independent journalist? Have you ever given this thought that you might want to actually go back?
I have a couple of times. I've been lured back often to do maternity leave cover for people for maybe a year or 9 months or something, and I hate it. Every time I go, why did I do this? I just get too bored. I hate the meetings. I hate the stuffing around. I hate the fiddly, you know, admin, blah. Every time I do it, I go, I cannot wait to get back into freelance where I can just write and do nothing else.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that wraps up the entire Q&A. Thank you. I will not be taking any more questions. So thank you, Alex. It was wonderful having you here. And it was nice to know the stories, the journey that you have gone through. I think all of us here got a lot of learning from how to go about one's job as an independent journalist. I think there are lots of tips that came along your way. And I think as we get to even expand and learn about the entire independent journalism market internationally, not just in one's own country, I think digital has, led to evolution where there are no boundaries, there are no borders. So I believe that, you might be in any part of the world and you can still be reporting about your story can be relevant to any other part of the world. So, and I think the learnings that we are sharing with each other will help us to make ourselves better and understand the world of journalism better and serve the world of journalism better. Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for making time. Thank you. We will be back next week with another guest for the Independent Talk, and we are going to have a guest from US, and he's going to be joining us next week. I'll reveal the names and everything later. Today, thank you. Good day, good evening, good night, wherever you are. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you very much. It was great.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.